as a buyer, I am not necessarily offended that an email is coming from a mailbox that says John Smith at ABC Co. And I do not assume that John Smith actually wrote me an email. Where I think we get in trouble is where a person uses AI in such a way that you cause the AI to pretend to be human. And there is a disconnect between, as a recipient, I think I'm dealing with the human, and it turns out I'm dealing with generative AI or a bot. The magic is in knowing how to push the generative AI to write a more specific message in a way that matters to you, that positions my product in such a way that it's solving some problem that you have. We are all familiar with the idea that you can personalize your HubSpot nurture sequences because they have tokens. Hi, curly brace first name. I see that you're working at curly brace company name. And that is the extent of the personalization that historically has been possible in these kinds of softwares. And what you gain is certainty that it will deliver that text, and that text only, with the token substitutions. So you're gaining certainty, but what you're losing is personalization, or what you are having to pay is complexity to do all the 40 different sequences and examples that we talked about earlier. So what if we go down the path where generative AI isn't just writing the email, but can act as the router, where we are presenting data to the large language model, and we're saying, given this data, where would you put this prospect? It chooses, and then we follow up and we say, now that you have chosen to put them into this segment, what would you say to them, given that I would say this? And that's where the real opportunity is. That, I think, is a fantastic use case of generative AI.
Welcome to the Tech Marketing Masters podcast, where we interview the best practitioners in tech marketing to give you an inside look at what other tech marketers are up to, what's working in marketing these days, what you can try with your team, and how to level up your marketing game. I'm your host, Lee Cooper, co-founder and CEO of Cooper, an SEO marketing agency that helps tech companies grow their organic search traffic. I'm joined today by Rod Fuentes, co-founder and CEO of Nubara, which helps sales and marketing close deals faster and more effectively by connecting them with decision makers through a network of introducers committed to mutual success. Today, we explore a lot of great insights like the decline of the predictable revenue model and cold email outreach, and an alternative new approach with relationship-led selling. Why trying to make AI sound like an authentic human might be the wrong approach entirely, and when our culture might prefer hearing the AI sound automated instead. How to use AI to leverage your company's unique customer data, segment customers into precise groups, and infer your prospects' needs for a truly personalized outreach, with specific examples and actionable opportunities. Why AI might uniquely benefit old incumbent companies more than new challengers, which is very unlike most disruptive new technologies. How AI could become an automated sales bot for your product, and which kind of AI company is more likely to become your sales chatbot of the future. And the idea that relationships and trust become currencies of the future, and how AI might form its own independent, trusting relationship with your audience, separate from you. If you're interested in any of these things, you won't want to miss this episode. So let's welcome Rod onto the show. Hello, hello.
What's going on, Lee? How's it going?
Going pretty good. I guess, Rod, you and I have been talking a little bit before, and so I know a little bit of what you're up to, but for our audience, I'm wondering if you could give just a quick intro on, a little bit of your background, where you're coming from, how'd you get into sales and the thing that you're doing right now?
Sure. My background is electrical engineering turned IP lawyer turned founder about 13 years ago. I've been spending that time in various roles, mostly in product, 8 years of it as a founder-led seller, and then a lot of the last few years in what is now generative AI. And along the way, I've gone to market with a variety of different products and tools. And, what I've learned along the way is that what used to work doesn't necessarily work anymore. And so that was a painful lesson to learn. And that's really when I started turning to solving that specific problem, right? How do we get in front of the right persona, the right prospects that we want to talk to? And it's something that has really started to take hold for I think, in everybody who sells anything or markets anything. And so that's been the transition to this new product that I'm working on called Nubara. And it's all about relationship-led selling, right? Getting in front of the right people through referrals and warm introductions.
Yeah. That was an interesting one because I was poking around your website, and you seem to have like a fairly like unique approach to things. Is it you know, I have unfortunately, co-founder and CEO in my LinkedIn, so that means that my email is forfeit. And so I get all these emails of people saying like, "Oh, wouldn't you like to have more, opportunities every month?" And you only pay us when we get you something, like that kind of spam. I get it all the time. And that's very much like I think the common approach right now is like, "Hey, I'm gonna go get a list of people, and then I'm gonna spam them with this email outreach." And from everyone I've talked to, it's like it's so much less effective today than it was 4 years ago or, 10 years ago. It's like it's a completely different landscape. But what you're doing with Nubara is like a very different approach. I'm curious, a little bit about, this whole relationship-led selling and these referrals and kind of the network that you're building there.
Yeah, it really stems from what you just said. When we went to market for my last startup before this one, it was at the height of the predictable revenue wave, right? Aaron Ross wrote this very influential book that spawned the entire SDR AE division of labor and resulted in everyone and their mother, quite literally, I think, actually, in this point, using cold email and using that as an approach to get in front of target buyers. And it worked. It used to just work magically, right? Because there were fewer people doing it and it was novel at the time. The idea that you can get a very curated list of your target persona from ZoomInfo, Discover.org, eventually Apollo. But I think once Apollo really came on the scene and democratized this technique so that anyone with $100 a month in credit card, self-service access could start doing this technique, that's really when I think you started to see the beginning of the end. And that's when you started to see the volume that was being delivered increase substantially. And as this technique of cold outreach became more of an open secret, right? Everyone started doing it. And so now we're at this point where, as you said, you've got the founder title in your LinkedIn. That's it, you're toast. You're going to get 200 emails a day, right? But here's where the jig is up, right? Email service providers like Microsoft 365, Google Apps, Gmail, and a few others in the SMTP game like Barracuda and Proofpoint, they have caught up to dealing with this issue. It's clear that recipients like you and me and many others don't necessarily love having 100 unsolicited emails in our inbox that make it difficult to get to the content and the emails that we need to actually work through in order to get our work done. And so all of these different email service providers have made it a value add of their products to more intelligently filter out all of that unsolicited email. And what does that mean? That means that the email game, the cold outreach, it's it's on its last breaths, I would say. And there's a lot of debate on LinkedIn about whether it's dead or dying. And I'll give you the real answer from a practitioner who's deep in it. It's not dead. It just doesn't work like it used to, right? In my last startup, we were doing 40 meetings a month that were booked off of 1,000 email prospects per month. And that is an incredible hit rate for any business. And now what you see is an average of maybe a 0.5% positive reply rate on thousands of emails sent. And so if your ICP is big enough, if the average sales price of your product is big enough, and you are extremely good at automating and keeping tabs on your deliverability, it might still work. But it's no longer the magic bullet that it used to be. And so all of that to say that seeing that transition from a moment in time when I knew it worked well to trying it again for my now startups and feeling that sort of valley of disappointment and disillusion of like, holy cow, what happened to this technique, right? that's where I realized, oh my God, there has to be other ways to go to market now. And there are. The one that still works is relationship-led selling, right? Using your network and the people that you are authentically connected to as a conduit to meet your target persona. But the reality is that that is very hard. It takes a lot of work, right? It means, and I'm sure you've played this game before, you go into LinkedIn and you identify, your 500 people you would love to meet. You understand who they're connected to. You go then, I go to Lee's LinkedIn profile and I say, hey, do you know Johnny? And you say, no, sorry, I don't know Johnny. We're connected on LinkedIn, but I don't know. I don't remember where I met him. Oh, okay, no worries, Lee. Well, do you know Amy? Oh, sorry, I don't know Amy either. Right. And we play this game back and forth, ping ponging it until finally I hit a name that you might know. But it doesn't end there. Then I have to ask you to actually reach out to them, give you the blurb. You reach out to them. They probably don't respond the first time, depending on how well you know them. I check in with you. You say, yeah, let me follow up. You follow up. Then they say yes or no. And then you get back to me and you make an intro. That is a lot of work, man. That's a lot of work for me. That's a lot of work for you as the facilitator in the middle. Right. And so all of that friction and that frustration, that process going through that, because it does work, just the required effort is so high. That's what led my co-founder and I to start Nubara with an aim of essentially streamlining that approach and putting as much of that on autopilot as possible.
Yeah. Now that is an interesting journey just through all of that. I think, firstly, just that email is not it's not what it used to be, you know. And then secondly, that you're kind of going more through like where are the relationships, where are the referrals, how do we kind of like make that connection? And so it sounds like, you're basically using Nubara and then a little bit of AI in there, a little bit of a network. Like how do you kind of go about doing that?
Yeah, there's two, I would say, significant parts to the platform. One is a very clear admission that the product is not the collection of features and the software. Like, yes, those are necessary, but the product is the network, right? If we have right now, we have about 70 some odd user members. And when each of them brings their network into the platform, they're essentially saying, I am a conduit to these 200 people. I know them well enough to make an introduction to them. And I am bringing them to the network. And what I get out of that is that I will get to meet people through other members and the contacts that they bring into the network. So that's what it means really to be the product is the network. With just 70 some odd users, we have 15,000 actual contacts that we can meaningfully introduce members to, right? And so as each member comes online, they add exponential value to the network. We hypothesize that with 1,000 members, we should be getting close to about 1 million contacts that are genuinely reachable through a warm introduction through one of those 1,000 members. So that's very powerful, right? The goal then really is to increase the size of the network so that we all benefit, because that's how we get more density around the kinds of people that you would like to meet and have enough breadth in terms of making sure that we have enough types of personas on the platform.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. That is a business that is like lives and dies on its network effect in a way. And there are a lot of good businesses that work that way, but it sounds like I mean, if you had like what is it, 1,000 users and you get to 1 million, I mean, good lord, that's yeah, that
Huge.
goes exponential. And so my assumption is basically someone kind of joins the platform, they're part of the network, they can reach out to anybody else in the network and all of their contacts that you've sort of figured out through I guess do you like find them through like LinkedIn or through email? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so that's a great point. It brings us back to the original question, which is, is there AI as part of the platform? Of course, everything has AI now, right? Well, what doesn't have AI? My breakfast has AI these days. So the initial version was very much what you described. The initial version was I'm Rodrigo. I brought in 200 contacts. Look at my contacts, Lee. Which one would you like to meet? And then you would say, I want to meet John Smith. And you would prepare an introduction blurb that I would then receive, review, and approve. And then the introduction would happen. The reality is that even that is too much friction. That's what we learned in the first release. It takes too much effort for you to find and figure out who you want to meet, right? No one really wants to go on to Apollo or ZoomInfo or any of these systems and set up 15 filters to say, I want to meet B2B SaaS, IT executives in the San Francisco area. We do all those things nowadays, but we do them in order to get a huge list of people, right? That is then perhaps run through some kind of AI prospecting matching function to whittle it down to a core set of actual prospects. And so, if that's the user expectation now, we need to rise and meet that expectation. So, instead of putting the burden on the user to say, hey, here are a bunch of filters, go find 100 people you want to meet. Now the thinking is, okay, describe to us what your ICP is, your ideal customer persona, in just a few words, right? And then with that, we get the opportunity to convert that into what are called text embeddings. And I don't want to get too jargony and nerdy on the AI side of things, but effectively, we do a vector embedded search across the 15,000 contacts that I referenced earlier, and we match them to your natural language description of who your ideal customer profile is. So now we've taken out that first hurdle of figuring out who do you want to meet. The second part really then is, okay, so if we know who you want to meet, how do we automate that process? And that's where it gets really interesting, because now, instead of putting the burden on you to do that search and then to ask me about whether or not I can approve the introduction, what we're doing is using the system as the router. And that does two things really. One, it takes the burden off of the other members to essentially have to review every single introduction request that comes through them. That's a lot of work. That's why the process has friction. And two, what we're doing instead is having the system do that step. And so you don't have to ask me for permission to meet John Smith. Instead, you just describe who you want to meet. If John Smith matches that criteria, then the system, through one of the members, whoever is the best route to John Smith, their email account will email John Smith and say, hey, Lee Cooper would like to meet you. He does great work through his SEO agency. Just wanted to check in if that's something that you'd be interested in learning more about. And importantly, you'll note that let's say I was the conduit and the best connection to John Smith. You'll note that my email to John, which is automated, by the way, is not, hey, I love Lee. He's fantastic. I've worked with him in the past. It's not a burning hot introduction, right? It's like a warm or lukewarm introduction in the sense that I am not vouching for you because I may not necessarily know you, but I'm just expressing what you do, and I'm checking in with my contact to determine whether or not they think it's interesting. It's on them now to opt in to that introduction. And if they don't do anything, then that's fine. No harm, no foul. The introduction doesn't go through. If they say no, our system processes the no and nothing happens. No introduction is made. But if they reply and say, yeah, that actually would be really interesting, then what we do is we read that reply, turn that into a yes or no binary output essentially. And if it's yes, then the system will facilitate that introduction from my email inbox and connect Lee and John Smith through your typical email introduction that we're all accustomed to seeing and receiving today.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting, like, just overall, that's a whole interesting angle in some ways. It's sort of like you have the network, and in some ways, the AI can just sort of figure out what's your ICP, what's the route to that person, how do we make that referral, just like automate the whole thing, which frankly, I just don't think would have been possible before AI. I think this is one of those kinds of companies where pre-AI wouldn't have happened. Now that we have AI, you can actually kind of do that stuff. But I can also see a lot of people saying like, "Oh yeah, but I get a bunch of AI emails and these kinds of things, and they're not very good." In fact, I just the other day got an outreach from somebody, and I responded to them because I thought, there was something there, and they responded to me in a way where I was like, "Okay, you fed this to ChatGPT," and I was kind of like, I don't really love this. It felt like, so somebody who had like a Slavic last name. I assume this person is Ukrainian, and perhaps took my email response, sent it to ChatGPT and said, give me like a good English response, and then copy pasted that and sent it to me. Like that's me reading between the lines. I think that's what happened. And I was kind of like, I was a little like miffed. And so it's one of these things where like getting the AI right on the words and these kinds of things is it's very tricky. I guess just, you're kind of an expert on this sort of thing. I'm curious what you've seen people like doing so far with AI and these kinds of emails, like what's not working and what's working. You know what I mean?
There's a couple. I mean, I have lots of thoughts, but I'll kind of try to do my best to focus in on the more salient ones. One is that what you're describing is what I'll call the sort of AI human authenticity disconnect, right? And my hypothesis on this right now is that um, it's 2024. We as a society, and maybe even more narrowly, B2B buyers and marketers understand the game now. And the game is that we all need automation in one way or another in order to make um, predictable revenue targets and growth and all these other things. So, as a buyer, I am not necessarily offended that an email is coming from a mailbox that says John Smith at ABC Co. And I do not assume that John Smith actually wrote me an email. I assume it's automated, right? In the same way that when, I don't know, Macy sends me an email that says, don't forget to check out that item that you didn't completely buy. That's automated, and I understand that. Where I think we get in trouble is where a person uses AI in such a way that you cause the AI to pretend to be human. And there is a disconnect between, as a recipient, I think I'm dealing with the human, and it turns out I'm dealing with generative AI or a bot. It's there that I think there is friction and a problem, right? And so in the world of cold email, you could tell that something was off, but you weren't necessarily maybe put off or offended. That's just par for the course. That's just, it is what it is, right? And so there's, in my head is still a battle happening between those two worlds where is the line, right? Where is the line? So what I'm trying to say is that, let's say we had a robot today that could pass the Turing test. Okay. And you and anyone would be completely unable to determine whether or not it was generative AI that wrote that email. Does that actually matter to you? Right? If it's good content, it's good content, is one point of view. Right. And in this case, it just happened to be it's not good content, right? That you felt something was off. But the reality is that there are plenty of emails before generative AI written by real humans that were also off and not good and didn't land for various reasons, right? And that didn't stop you from transacting with people. So I think to focus on the content that generative AI is sort of the villain in the story is perhaps a red herring. And the real focus point is, do I want human authenticity? Do I as a buyer want genuine human authenticity? And if the answer is yes, then every instance of generative AI that is sent my way is in tension with some inner desire that I have to want human authenticity. If the answer is no, I don't have a preference for human authenticity, then it's okay. Automation is fine, and generative AI or not, so long as it's good copy, is okay. That's one kind of track of thought. The second is, suppose that we are marketers and we feel that our consumer, our buyer, is okay with generative AI content or automated content because they expect that all marketing and sales emails at this point are automated. Then, to your point, how do we generate good content? So notice that I'm not using content that can't be told apart between human and generative AI, because that's the first talk track we just mentioned, right? Let's just say good content. To make good content, I think you have to, one, deeply understand the customer's needs and the pain points and speak to them in as specific way as possible, right? And I think that's the foundation for good content. In the past, marketers, and I was one of them in my last startup, we would solve this by having 30, 40 different email segmentation tracks in our Marketo and our HubSpot, right? And you would open it up and it'd be like email track 1 for people who downloaded this landing page ebook, who saw this webinar, who have a lead score above 30 and are this job title. That'd be one email track just for them, right? And then you'd have like 39 others for all the other permutations and combinations. So what are you doing? What you're doing is you're trying to segment the users using if then else logic to try to get content messaging that is as narrowly fitting as possible to whoever falls into that particular bucket. And the reality is that no matter how good you are at slicing all these different attributes, people are more fluid than rigidly defined boxes, number one. Number two, there's always some efficient frontier that is happening around your team's ability to use time, energy, resources to create those finer and finer and finer segmentations. So at some point, some teams stop at 10 segmentations, some teams have 100 segmentations. It depends on the resources and what it's worth to you, right? So I think this is where AI really changes the game. AI basically says, what if we didn't need all of those rigid if else combinations? What if I could just read the attributes of a prospect or a contact in your marketing automation database? And based on the attributes, the AI, can determine which quasi segment they belong in, what messaging that particular user should receive, and then execute the messaging and deliver it to that recipient. That, I think, is the promise of good content and why AI is uniquely positioned to deliver it.
Yeah. No, that's a lot of interesting stuff right there. You just like brain dump two really good things. And it's kind of like the first one I'm still mulling over, like, yeah, that's really good. Because like the first one, it sounds like it's not so much about the current talk track of AI versus human and that kind of thing. Because like what you're saying is, I get these emails that are clearly generic saying like, hey, we have this clearance sale, or like, hey, you left this thing, you abandoned your cart, make sure you don't miss it, or this kind of stuff. And I know full well that's not like human authentic, but I didn't expect it to be. So it's like not an issue. And so I think it's like a cultural thing that it's not AI versus human. It's just, I think the problem might be when we're trying to pass the AI off as a human, and there was an expectation that that was actually a human. That's when you get into a problem. Now, on the other hand, if you've set the expectation, look, some of our stuff is auto-generated, but it's there to try and personalize it to people. People can like accept that. I mean, I get direct mail, to this very day, I still get direct mail where they're just like spamming you or, this kind of stuff. But, and I know it's not human. It's not supposed to be. So I think that's like an interesting point. And a lot of people are still stuck in that mindset of like, there's AI versus human. It's like, well, think more from the perspective of what people's expectations were, and are you violating that expectation, or do they know? Are they okay with it? Like you've automated some things, everybody knows that, and then your second point is kind of like, I think it's interesting because it kind of opens my eyes to the fact that right now I feel like when I talk to people, sometimes AI gets this bad rap of like, oh, well, it's just AI. It only gets 80% of the way there. It doesn't feel fully human. But I mean, there is kind of this promise that I think we lose sight of, that in the next several years, 5, 10 years, the AI frankly does a much better job of personalizing things per person than we can as humans. And this is kind of like one of those things where I see like, I don't know if it's the hype cycle, but I feel like maybe people were sold on this idea that we're just a few years out from super intelligence or something. AI is going to do all this stuff, and then people saw like what it actually does, and it does a pretty good job. Like a lot of the AI now does a pretty good job, but it is not perfect, And so people are in the trough of disillusionment to some degree, thinking like, oh well, I still need a human to do this stuff, but like they're losing sight of the fact that we're just at the beginning of this. We could have another 10, 20, 100 years of AI development. And the rate, like human error rate is a certain amount, and the AI error rate could actually be driven down below that. And
Yes.
so in 5 years, the personalization you get out of an AI could actually be significantly better than anything that humans did previously, because it can just go through your database. It can look at every interaction every individual's had. look at that, see where they are in the journey, and like really reach out to them in a way that you could never do as a human. You know what I mean? Like it's not doable.
Let me add something to that, which is there is, I won't speak for 10 years from now, but in the short term, let's say in the next 12 to 24 months, to the extent that any marketing organization, sales organization is using generative AI to write content, and many people are doing this, the magic, I would say, is not in having the generative AI just write the content, because then you will just get essentially fancy, expensive spin tax where it's just rewording whatever it is it's going to say. The magic is in knowing how to push the generative AI to personalize the message, but not personalize in the way that, oh, Lee, you're in Denver. Have you taken RTD bus number 32? What a pain, huh? You see a lot of these LinkedIn posts that kind of gripe about this. That is personalized, but that doesn't matter to you. That doesn't help you discover your pain points, position the product relative to those pain points. So the magic really is, how do I get generative AI to write a more specific message in a way that matters to you, in a way that positions my product in such a way that it's solving some problem that you have, right? The magic is getting generative AI to infer your pain points based on your job title, based on where you work, based on some information that I have about you. And if I can do that, infer something about you, hopefully be right, and then position my product relative to that, well, now we're cooking with gas. That's interesting, right? And now you get better engagement around that, or you should. And I think an example is perhaps useful in this scenario. I'll let me pop this up and we can take a quick look at it. So, in the world of scalable personalization that we're talking about, right? Your simple framework is you have some kind of inputs, and it's CRM, contact activity data, et cetera. You're going to chain it through a bunch of different prompts that you're using to push generative AI to do the things we were just mentioning. And the output is some personalized email. Okay, that's great, but what does that mean, right? What it means is that when you have your input, there are two schools of thought on this right now. The predominant view is that generative AI is being used from mostly revenue organizations, sales teams who are using something like Clay, right? And Clay is fantastic at creating a set of prospects that you want to go after, enriching them in some way, and then firing off those quasi-personalized emails where it may or may not be relevant, depending on how you use the tool. And the sad reality is that in this highly SaaS democratized, SaaSified world that we live in, every seller on the planet has access to all of this data. Right? Once upon a time, it was the case that only buyers of ZoomInfo or buyers of 6sense had access to really high quality intent, high quality prospecting data. And so they could do some very unique and interesting things in a way that wasn't noisy. But now, because everyone has access to Clay, Apollo has good intent data, and so forth, it means that as soon as you post a job on LinkedIn, you better believe you're going to get 20, 30 different vendors who are using that trigger as an intent signal that you are hiring. And hiring means that's a proxy for your desire to potentially buy CRM, potentially buy an ATS system, potentially hire an agency that does sales instead of hiring a salesperson, right? All of these kinds of intent-based triggers that we see out there. And here's the catch, because everyone is doing it at the same time, it then all just gets lost in the noise, right? And no one wins. That's the crazy part. And so the real value that I see right now in using generative AI is, how can you bring your own unique data into the equation? Because now you have something that competitors or anybody else on the market does not have for purposes of personalizing that message. So what I have on my screen is your typical data set that would be inside of your Marketo/Adobe marketing engine, inside of your HubSpot, inside of whatever marketing automation tool that you use. And what would be in here are things like, of course, the contact information about the prospect, right? The account information, what account they're in, what industry they're in. But I think more tellingly, it's their engagement. What have they engaged on your website? Did they visit that pricing page? Did they download that ebook? Did they download that webinar? All of that data is being logged in that marketing automation system, right? There's history of interactions your team has had with that prospect, either CRM notes, call notes, the fact that they were called, and all that information. That I believe is all very rich data that can be used to personalize any of the existing nurture tracks that any marketer already has in play. And so when I think about that, I imagine a scenario where we take that data, we feed it through prompts where, and here's the important part, the prompt isn't, hey, take this data and write an email. That's like in the spectrum of crawl, walk, run, that's crawling, like barely crawling, right? What you want to do instead is to use generative AI to infer something about your prospect. And so in this prompt, it's saying essentially visit their website, determine what they sell, and identify the three most likely personas that they target. Now, this is an example specific to me because when I do this kind of outreach and this kind of marketing automation track, I'm trying to figure out for my target persona, which is an SDR, BDR, I'm trying to figure out who do they sell to. If I know who they sell to, I can automatically look up whether or not we have contacts in the Nubara database that match that persona, that I could speak to that, right? Earlier to my point about matching the solution to the inferred pain point. So the output from this first prompt is, hey, so-and-so likely targets data scientists, machine learning engineers, and business intelligence folks. Okay, interesting. Let's cross-reference that against what is in the Nubara database, right? And then we feed that into a subsequent prompt. Okay, now I know who they target. Now I know who's in the database that matches that persona. Now take my templated email and marry it together with the inference that we have and the data that's in the database to create a far more personalized message. So now every SDR that I reach out to, every person who's in my MQLs, I'm nurturing them, but I'm talking about the personas that they target, right? And that's what I hope is what creates that better engagement. Okay, and why stop there, right? Go to their website, infer who they compete with. Well, let's take the list of competitors and let's feed it through a different prompt that creates a subject line that references one or two of the competitors. Well, now I have a subject line that they should recognize because if they're a seller worth their salt, they at least know who they're coming up against on a routine basis, right? And so now my subject lines are including competitor names that might raise an eyebrow and increase the open rate, for example. So these, I would argue, are sort of more advanced ways to get the most out of generative AI when you're trying to write the copy. It's not, like we said at the beginning, it's not about just, hey, spin up a 3 email sequence, you copy paste that and you run with it. That's what the median or average person is doing, right? And that's what's quickly is losing value because it doesn't deliver anything extra. At best, it's fancy spin tax to get past the spam filters, which has its place in the world, that is valuable, but ultimately not where you really want to be.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I will say you've got me thinking all sorts of thoughts with that one. And part of it is like when I see a lot of these, sales agencies and things like that, and they're using AI to create, emails and do outreach. It's very much like what you're saying. It's the crawl approach of like, hey, here's a bunch of prospects. Now just write a whole bunch of emails for me that fills in their name and says like, "Oh, I noticed you came from this university or whatever," and as if like that cares. I've had people say like, "Oh yeah, you came from Penn State," and I'm like, "That was, I don't know, a decade ago. I don't care."
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's like this is not my problem. And in some ways, it's like I've heard the narrative that AI kind of democratizes things, and that everyone can now kind of achieve the same level because they all have access to AI and they can kind of like do things at scale. But in some ways, like what you're showing me almost makes me think like, yes, it democratizes things, but it's almost widened the gap between the people who are doing the bare minimum and the people who can really personalize stuff. Because like what you're saying, you take this approach where you're not just saying like, hey, here's a persona, here's some basic information, go write me some emails. You're going to have some people who are very, bright about it, saying, okay, try to infer what is their main problem, who is their persona, what are they struggling with, what have they been looking at on the website. Like, you can infer the need from there and then personalize to the need, not just like, oh, I found that you're in Denver or something like that. You can get down to the problem, and that's usually where you start really cooking with gas, as you say. Like, that's so you've almost widened the gap with AI, where the highest level stuff you can do is almost even higher than the people who are just creating noise at scale
Mhm.
using AI. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That was the point I wanted to make earlier, and you nailed it. It's the range of creativity in the go-to-market motion, I think, has never been as high as it was perhaps at the height of the Mad Men era, right? When it's like, let's create this amazing campaign, and there's a lot of creativity about it. Some of that creativity, I think the pendulum's shifted to more of a analytical scientific approach in the 20 aughts, where it's more about the data and like, let's A/B test all these different colors and buttons and variations, and there is a place for that, and that's exciting. But we're seeing, I think, a pendulum swing back to the creativity in the architecture of how you organize these campaigns and use generative AI creatively to achieve your goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said for that. Like, I think that also touches on another problem I've seen where, and I've personally felt as well, is that I think I'm in a camp with a lot of other people where I know that AI is really important. AI is going to revolutionize all these things. I played around with it. I use it for a few things, but I just feel like maybe there's like a hack I haven't found or a trick I could be using. There's more I could be doing with AI, but I just haven't had the creativity or the time to sit there and think through like, what is this extra thing I could be doing? I suspect there's a lot of people out there, like a lot of CMOs who, they've been playing with AI, they're using it for content marketing, they're using it for different things, and they know it's a big deal, but they just feel like there's probably one more thing that they could be doing, and it's a matter of creativity, like you're saying, to find like that magic hack or that magic like thing they could be doing. You know what I mean? I don't know if you have any opinions on that.
A ton. One is to find your neighborhood AI trainer. This is, I think, a cottage industry that's going to boom in the next year or two, right? The one I'd recommend is Future Proof. You can check out alwaysfutureproof.com. And essentially, like you said, the challenge is you don't know what you don't know. The art of the possible is perhaps the hardest part of generative AI because it's constantly evolving and it's so fast that by the time it dawns on you that it could turn your typical email into a Eminem style rap. That's cool. I didn't know it could do that. Meanwhile, a year of creativity has evolved in the marketplace, but your head's down. You're building. You're doing your work. You don't have time to experiment and play. And at this point in the technology cycle, that's what's required. It's like this art and science alchemy of knowing what's possible, pushing the boundaries, and trying something new. And that's where I think generative AI trainers, people who dedicate themselves to figuring this stuff out, can be helpful for an organization. I've done a lot of thinking and some workshops with the future proof folks. One of the things that's interesting, coming up with all the different ways in which we can leverage it for our marketing automation. So, in one example, everyone has these templates that we talked about, the nurture sequences, and they're 7 emails deep. And what you are gaining through automation is, of course, scale. Um, and we're all familiar with the idea that you can personalize your HubSpot nurture sequences because they have tokens, right? Tokens are like, hi, curly brace first name. I see that you're working at curly brace company name. And that is the extent of the personalization that historically has been possible in these kinds of softwares. And what you gain is certainty that it will deliver that text and that text only with the token substitutions. And even then, we've seen problems that accidentally happen when you have bad data, et cetera, et cetera. So you're gaining certainty, but what you're losing is personalization, or what you are having to pay is complexity to do all the 40 different sequences and examples that we talked about earlier. And so what if we we go down the path where generative AI isn't just writing the email. It can do that, and that's interesting. But if generative AI can act as the router, where we are presenting data to the large language model, and we're saying, given this data, where would you put this prospect? In which of the 30 segments, where would you put them? It chooses. And then we follow up and we say, now that you have chosen to put them into this segment, what would you say to them given that I would say this? Right. And that's where the real opportunity is to say, okay, let me tell you about the customer. Now that you've put them here, let me tell you about them. They had 6 support tickets, and we were able to resolve 5 of them successfully. There's one that's still open, and we're working on it. What could we do to nurture that prospect forward for a renewal, right? Based on some information that we have about them and the support ticket issues that were flowing back and forth. That I think is a fantastic use case of generative AI, both in its ability to route the prospect into the appropriate segment, and then 2, to personalize the interaction with them in a way that leverages unique data that only you have based on the support tickets that have been generated.
Yeah, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I mean, in some ways, I almost see like because what I've been hearing through the grapevine is that the customer support and customer maybe more support than success. They've really been like going through a major revolution with this AI and the chat bots and that kind of thing. I mean, if you think of like intercom and those types, I mean, there's all sorts of, they can have a field day with this sort of stuff. And what you're saying is like from a marketing and a sales perspective, not only is that helpful for, customer support, but it also means that we now have more data on where they are in the process. Can we infer what the problem is and how we can maybe like reach out to them based on that problem? Can we offer a solution here? And kind of like really, I mean, honestly, I'm out here thinking like, man, 10 years from now, if you have like some mega AI for your company that's got like it has the customer support data and the marketing data and sales and all this kind of stuff, you could really start seeing a lot of things that we just would not see, you know what I mean? And really connect with people in a different way, more than a human, which is kind of weird to say.
Put a pin in that. I want to come back to this idea that generative AI is perhaps one of few technologies in recent human memory and history where there is a overwhelmingly strong advantage to the incumbents. And I want to come back to that. But before I do, I wanted to share maybe 2 or 3 other examples of more intelligent ways to use generative AI for the marketing team. Because as I was saying, the art of the possible is really where it's at. So my hope is that this stimulates some thought for the audience, right? We were just talking about intercom and how many chatbot interactions don't go all the way, right? Where you kind of realize like, oh, okay, I'm with the chatbot. You're just qualifying me. I got it. Okay, there's not a whole lot of intelligence here. But by that point, you've already given your email and you've answered 1 or 2 questions. The reality is I've talked to several marketing organizations, and the number of quasi MQLs that kind of get stuck in the pipeline is astounding. Right? And this really represents a lot of meat that isn't being digested and taken into the system. And I think that there's a really interesting opportunity here to analyze a lot of those incomplete interactions. And if they already have an email attached to them, put them through a process where we infer something about them and leverage that unique data, which is that chatbot interaction, to re-engage that prospect and actually get them to complete the process of going into a properly marketing qualified lead and hopefully getting it over to the sales team. That I think is another really missed opportunity that I hope more people start doing soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of like I think stirring a lot of juices in like just different ways you can kind of get creative about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll leave you with one more. This is one that I implemented just earlier this week. One of the things that I see marketing sometimes when they collaborate with product teams is you have intercom, you have the ability to segment users based on some kind of in-application behavior, right? And for us, what that means is When a user comes on board to Nubara, the main thing we need them to do is to tell us what their ideal customer persona is in a sentence or two. That is what powers our ability to start matching them to contacts in the database. Okay, so if they haven't taken that step, we're kind of stuck on the onboarding. And so what do we do? Well, what I started doing is instead of begging and emailing constantly, come on, come back, and enter your ICP. We take those users from the database who haven't yet filled out the ICP. It's a segmentation exercise, easy enough. And then I put them through a generative AI process where I say, okay, I know your Google authenticated business email address is such and such at abc.com. We fire up a web agent, researches that domain, it visits the domain, it crawls the site and figures out what they sell. Next step is I infer, like I showed you earlier, who they sell to. And then I then infer an ideal customer profile based off of that. And I pre-populate that into the product for them. Now, when they come back into the app or when I email them to do this action, all I am asking them to do is to confirm the inferred ICP. And as you know, any human's ability to not start with the blank page is more than half the battle, right? And that's really where the value is. If you infer any of your onboarding steps on behalf of your user to get them to just update, tweak, or just click, yes, that looks right, is a huge value add in terms of getting them past that sort of sticking point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm over here thinking like, how many forms could you autofill? How much data can you autofill? All the onboarding you can do for that. There's like so much stuff that you could really onboard. And the thing is, like, especially for onboarding, that friction, if people don't get past that friction, it's amazing how much you lose, just in those first like 30 minutes. So yeah, you have all these different examples here. And
Yeah,
I'm hoping for a lot of people in the audience that, like, it inspires a few ideas, like
I hope
things
so.
do for marketing, for sales, for customer. Really just about anything. And so there's a lot of potential there. I am curious because you said, to put a pin in that whole thing about, what was it? Something about incumbents?
Oh yes, AI benefit. So the story here, I think my sort of developing hypothesis on this is that AI as a technology, not just AI, because AI has been around for a long time, classical machine learning, it's an outgrowth of statistical models, but generative AI, and specifically the kind that we have been seeing in the last couple of years, is a very interesting technology because I think unlike many other revolutionary technologies that come across, this one uniquely benefits the incumbents. It's very odd. If you look at the history of, let's say, mobile, the miniaturization of hard drives, all kinds of technological leaps that have happened, it's often some new upstart that takes advantage of an inherent trade off that happens in the technology to open a new market that the incumbents don't want, don't really care for, is too small. It's your classic innovator's dilemma, right? Generative AI and the ability to add on AI features doesn't meet the standard model of the innovator's dilemma. Every company, small or big, is strongly incentivized right now by the market, by shareholders, by FOMO, by hype to incorporate AI into their product. That's number one. Number two, the cost of doing that is extremely low because it's all API driven for the most part. Number three, in past technological leaps, you often required a deep technical experience on some new fangled technology technique that wasn't well understood by everyone in the market. And so it required this very deep expertise and the ability to hire a very niche set of skills that you were taking a big risk on. Not so with generative AI. You just get any old engineer and say, like, here are the APIs, here's what we want to build, go for it. And hell, generative AI will even help you code it, right? And so we have never been in this situation, I think, where the new technology is easy to adopt, clear that you should, and everyone has the skill set to do it. And as a result of that, you see companies big and small having the capability and desire to implement it, and they have. And so, in a world where a technological leap often creates opportunities for upstarts and new companies to take advantage of that gap and create a new category, create a new product that uniquely attracts some specific customer base. We are seeing people try that. That is true. But the lead that they have is increasingly short. It's very short-lived, right? And so in the world where you can start something and try to fill in a gap because of generative AI, if the feature or the product that you're building is suddenly possible because of generative AI, then man, it better be more than just that. Because guaranteed there are substitute products, competitors who can add that on as a feature. And their incumbency, which typically is a proxy for their distribution power, the ability to reach customers and put this feature into play, is so much stronger and more powerful than the speed at which you can develop that particular feature set and attract a whole new customer base. That's the punchline that really, I think, hurts for startups who are in this generative AI space.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, for me, just a little bit of backstory. When I was starting to work somewhere around, I don't know, like 2014, 2015, there was like an AI boom at that time. And people were like, oh, this is going to be the year when AI finally comes out of, what is it, like AI nuclear winter, and it's all going to happen. I think Magic, if I'm not mistaken, came out, and there was like that idea that it was all going to be AI at some point and it could do anything. And that was like 2014 or something. And obviously that was perhaps more hype than reality. But what I remember from that time period is like really a lot of AI was machine learning, and a lot of machine learning is really just statistics. It's very fancy math that is able to correlate an input to an output with just a scary level of accuracy. And so there was all this hype around like, oh, everyone's going to have AI. But then what I saw over the years was that for the most part, it seemed like it was the larger organizations that had just a crazy amount of data. It's the big data era, and they have all this data, and there's no way you're going to get a data team to like crunch through all of that. And so you got like some fancy machine learning technology and a bunch of consultants and this kind of thing. And they could do that. But for the smaller companies, there was really no point in doing it because they didn't have that much data to warrant the full, like, extremely expensive machine learning solution. And so it basically became, I think, what they used to call like business intelligence, but now they called it like big data and machine learning. And it was mostly for the large enterprises that had the data that necessitated that. And to some degree, I feel like there's still an echo of that in what you're saying. Like the incumbents are the ones who can do things at scale. And in some ways, AI was always built for like being able to just crunch crazy amounts of data. Well, the people who have that level of data is the incumbents. They kind of have a little bit of an advantage there. So there's kind of like an interesting point where it's not quite as disruptive as we might think with most of the other technologies. But on the other hand, I do see a few like companies here and there where I'm like, I do think that the AI is doing something that's not just like more or just like more data would help. It really does feel like a 90-degree angle where it's just a completely different approach. And without AI, it could not be done. And part of like what I'm thinking in my head is actually right now I'm actually comparing Google's AI overviews to Perplexity. And this is an interesting contrast for me, and I don't know which way it's gonna play out, but the way that I feel like Google's done it is like, "Hey, we have this massive data set of, like, we've indexed most of the known web, basically. We have tons of data on all these websites and the pages and the keywords and all this kinda stuff, and then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take our top search results, run that through an AI, and then slap an AI overview on the top of the search results and pretend that we're an AI company now." And it feels very much like the early versions of the AI overviews feel like they took AI and just bolted on top of your normal search results. And it doesn't feel very revolutionary. It feels very evolutionary. It's very much just like, hey, the search results, but summarized. But then I see stuff like Perplexity, and I'm able to just like ask entirely new questions. I get very personalized answers. And it's not just a list of search results. It really does feel like more conversational and this kind of thing. They're both search engines of a type, but I think Perplexity is one of those where it's just net new in a way. It feels net new and not like something where if you just like crammed more data into it, it would just suddenly work. So I think that there might be some industries where incumbency just totally wins. They have the data and that's what AI is for. But then there are some other places where like you just couldn't do this before. You know what I mean? Like it truly is disruptive because it's net new. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's, whether perplexity will win and whatever that means, um, it will be an interesting marker to follow on this hypothesis, because this is, I think, a clear example of that. Right? Google has distribution. If there's ever a company that has distribution, it's Google. And they have the ability to bolt on, as you said, artificial intelligence, generative AI, and they have, right? And so, what's going to happen now? Will their distribution win over the upstart novel functionality that they have? And there are some very clear innovator dilemma situations happening here, where Google's existing multi-billion-dollar ad business is in tension with the AI overview answers, because that is prime advertising space. And what you will notice as you do your analysis, do intentful searches and do non-intentful searches. And that is currently what I think is the difference between whether or not you get an AI overview. Yeah, essentially, the ad search revenue model is determining whether a specific set of keywords have sufficient buying intent behind them. If they don't have enough buying intent, you actually don't even see ads in the Google advertising, the search engine. Before Gemini, currently, that's always been the case. They just don't have enough volume to sell against that. But if you have a high intent search, there's ads everywhere, right? And a high intent search is like, I need a personal injury lawyer. Oh boy, those pay $100 a click. That's very intentful, right? You want to sell those search results. And so when I did a quick study on this, those kinds of searches, there's no AI overview. They don't want to take that valuable real estate for generative AI answers. And I think it was just yesterday that I saw Perplexity released their monetization plan. Did you take a look at that?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, they've been making a lot of moves in the last few months alone in terms of their revenue model and everything. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And so they're taking this completely different view, which is not monetizing the space around your search, but I think it was monetizing the question, right? Essentially allowing advertising partners to pay for a question that a user would engage with or fill out or kind of interact with. And that's interesting, right? Because that could be the thing that cleaves whatever market power Google currently has. Because what is very clear is that the market has moved on from the idea that I go to a search engine in order to find the website that gives me the content that I want. That's too much work. And the reality is there's too much filler in those pages today because of the game that they're having to play in order to get the traffic that they want and need. And so this is the pendulum swinging back in the direction of consumers who just want the answer. Like, that's it.
Yeah, it is a very interesting one because, like what you're saying, Google's definitely one of those that I think has been staring down the barrel of the innovator's dilemma in more than a few ways. And I feel like they've been showing a lot of the symptoms of innovator's dilemma. And like the ad thing being such a problem because, the going theory is that generating these AI overviews is probably like, if you look at the cost of simply retrieving stuff from the index and listing it, that's like, it's got to be fractions of a penny. The cost of generating an AI overview for every search across all the searches they have, I mean, that's probably crazy in terms of cost, but they really haven't figured out a way to monetize on it well. And I think just this morning, I was actually seeing some experiments from Google trying to like basically the AI overviews on things that show some shopping intent. And then I think it sounded like a movement towards trying to get the AI to answer more shopping related questions. And the way I've been thinking about this is like 10 years from now when this thing gets really advanced, could be Google, could be Perplexity. Once the AI realizes that you've gone from like researching something general to actually having a need, the AI could kind of sell you. It could like the AI could get smart enough to start teasing out of you what are the needs, what's the problem here, what's the pain point, and basically go into like sales discovery mode effectively. And then start saying, hey, would you like me to go find solutions to the problems that you've given me? And you just like say yes. And it goes into full like sales mode and then tries to like sell you something and potentially even get a commission off of it. I know that sounds crazy, but like, especially in consumer, you really could have Perplexity or Gemini or something try to like understand the needs, list solutions, review it for you, get you all the way to a sale, and then like make commissions off of it. Right now, Perplexity has something where if it starts listing products, you can click and go straight to like the pretty much like the shopping cart view on that web page, which is kind of crazy. That's like really ambitious. But I mean, if you could make a business out of something that goes from being someone's search engine to being their sales person that literally sells them stuff, oh man, that's easily $1 billion business. You know what I mean? Like that right there is either the next Google or you know what I mean? Uh, but yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself with that one.
No, you're not too ahead of it. Quite honestly, before we went down the Nubara path, we prototyped a B2B version of what you're describing. Because the flip side of Nubara, right, is solving a problem for the salesperson who wants to get in front of a buyer. The flip side of that coin is buying is broken, right? The reason
Yeah.
buying is broken is because we're all just being pulled. It's like I once likened it to fly fishing, right? Sales is like you're just casting, you're throwing your fly into the water, and every now and again, a fish will bite. And that represents the concept that only 3% of buyers are ever in market at any given time, but you don't know which ones. And so you have to constantly pull them and ping them. Are you in market? Are you in market? How about now? And so that is part of what's contributing to this broken model of marketing and sales. And as a buyer, what I really want to do is when I have buying intent, I want to do some research. I want to talk to my colleagues, trusted people that I believe in. I want to look at reviews. I want to do all these things. And eventually, I do want a consultative sales process if one is warranted. And then I want to engage in the funnel, right? And so what we prototyped was essentially a flow where I would say I'm interested in HubSpot. Um, and the agent would act as a sales, a sort of an independent third party, not salesperson, but consulting vendor or vendor consultant, I should say. And they would say, "Oh, you want to buy HubSpot?" And I have some transcripts somewhere. If this is interesting, I can share them with you. The agent essentially says, "Oh, you want to buy HubSpot? That's interesting. What problem are you trying to solve?" "Well, I'm trying to do marketing automation." "Okay, well, that's interesting already because HubSpot has like 30 products, right, or like feature sets that may or may not be interesting to you." "Okay, marketing automation. That's great. How big is the contact database that you have?" "Well, it's this many." "Interesting. And are they primarily consumer or business?" "Oh, okay. Well, it's business." "Okay, interesting." And then it just keeps asking questions until it essentially has discovered enough about the problem, the pain point, and in its knowledge, can I identify and recommend what is likely to be the best fit product for you. And so that is not far off. I'll tell you why we didn't go down that path. I still think it's a very compelling idea. And if you want to see a consumer version of that, of course, there's Perplexity. But did you know that Microsoft actually has a consumer version of what I just described, which is what
As
inspired the B2B version that we were experimenting with? If you go with, I think it's called Research with Bing, and you can pull up Microsoft's version of this. And you go into Bing, and it's basically a buyer chatbot that has access to all the Bing indexed shopping results. And I did an example where I said, I want to, buy a pickleball paddle. And it went through the whole thing. "Oh, cool. What kind of player are you? Power or control?" Or control." "Okay. And are you looking for, 14 millimeter or 60 millimeter?" "I don't know. What's the difference?" And we had a conversation which guided me through that buying process. So that's what we sought to replicate. Now, the reason why I thought that the opportunity isn't ripe is because the buying moment and the buying cycle happens but few times a year. Whereas the desire to search for an answer is daily. And so that's why the search engine works and is valuable and can do that job, but the inverse isn't true. If I only do the job of consulting you to buy a product, do you remember that I exist? Do you come back next time you have to buy something? The customer acquisition cost for this hypothetical company that is trying to counsel you on your purchase is very high because I have to catch you when you're ready to buy, which is the same problem everybody else is having. Never mind that. And after I acquire you as a user, what kind of value do I give you in all of the other days when you're not in a buying cycle? If we could unlock that problem, if we can solve, how do I keep you engaged every other day and then remind you that I exist for the buyer consultative process, I agree with you. That is a billion-dollar company, no doubt.
Yeah. But it's almost like at that point, you have to start with something like Google or Perplexity. That's just an everyday use case. And then it goes down the sales path. But if you went just pure sales, that yeah, I can see how it's very difficult to like acquire and retain users in any like meaningful way. I almost see that being a better application for like, just as a consumer example, if someone's trying to like buy a car and the car company or like a website that's there to help people buy cars is offering that as a free chatbot or something. And that company, basically that website is the one that's paying for it. There might be a business there, but it's still like that's a really tough business. So yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I'm excited for the future there, man. I have actually been using Perplexity to buy things like I did get like a gaming PC, and you know how there are like all these different parts, and it says like this kind of RAM and that kind of thing. And it's been a long time since I've dabbled in that stuff, and I'm like, okay, if I take this part and I just throw it at Perplexity and I say, what does this mean? Like, what does this part mean? Like, what am I getting here? And it does an amazing job of like really informing me what these parts do, pros and cons of different things. And it's like, I've gone through the sales journey thanks to Perplexity with, like buying things like PCs and other like kind of difficult things. And then I'm actually going through the process of researching like buying a car with Perplexity. And so it's already going down that path, but again, it's like it's not quite there where it's like going to be, your own little like sales consultant, if you will. It's not quite there, but I mean, 5-10 years, that kind of thing could happen. And so that's just interesting from a general like both marketing and a sales perspective.
Well, what you made me think about is, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about relationships and trust. I believe that those are the currencies of the future. Okay. That is what gets people to buy. And so, what does it mean for you to trust Perplexity in this context? Right. I think yesterday, maybe the day before, I posted about the gel man effect, gel man amnesia effect. And I was at the Colorado Speaker Series, and the famed neuroscientist David Eagleman gave a talk. And so I went down this like neuroscience rabbit hole. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So I went down that and I read about this gel man amnesia effect. And basically it's it's the concept that when you read an article, you open up the newspaper and you read an article about a topic that you're an expert in, and you read it and you're like, God, this guy's full of shit. It doesn't make any sense. There's an error right here. There's a flaw right here. This logic is wrong. This is unbelievable. Then you turn the newspaper and you read the next article about world politics, AI, buying cars. And you're like, this is really insightful. Oh my God. But if you were an expert in those fields, the same kind of errors, flaws, and problems with the one that you read that you didn't like exist in those as well. You just don't know it because you're not an expert in those fields. The way that we overcome that in this world is that we have trust. We have trust in the newspaper or the writer, or that it's been peer reviewed, or that there's an editor, right? And that trust is what allows us to overcome whatever gel man amnesia effect that we may have. What does it mean then for us to trust generative AI when it is giving us buying recommendations? Why do we believe? And you probably have done this. Have you ever gotten an answer from ChatGPT, Perplexity, et cetera, that's about your specific niche industry? You're like, this isn't quite right. And yet, when it tells us about things we don't know, we're like, God, this thing's a genius. Oh my God, this is amazing, right? And so I think that effect is happening a lot right now, and we just have to be mindful of it and aware of whatever bias is inherent in the training data, right? It's giving us answers that got them from somewhere, and it's not using human reason and logic. It's a statistical parrot at this point.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. The concept of trust in relationships in the context of AI is kind of interesting to me because it's like, and this kind of loops back to what you were saying earlier is when we're expecting, human authenticity and we get the AI, in some ways it almost violates some trust and it violates the relationship. But as we kind of like adapt as a culture, there's a little bit more of knowing that some things are just going to be AI, and we know that. And we have like this almost separate relationship with the AI. And sometimes we might even trust it. Like I've actually asked Perplexity some fairly like very loaded and very biased political questions. Let's just put it that way. And it has always done an amazing job of being very neutral, very unbiased, it tries to take, facts from both sides or opinions from both sides and then doesn't try and pass anything off as fact. It does an amazing job of that. And I actually trust Perplexity more than I trust most people because I hate to say it, but the environment right now, a lot of people are very opinionated. And it's kind of refreshing that my AI is not so opinionated. That's kind of cool. I actually almost have more trust in that thing than other people, which is it's a weird relationship when you think about it. But there's some mileage there. And it almost makes me wonder, where else as a marketer can you kind of come in and say, look, this is an AI. It's not just going to try and sell you stuff. It doesn't make money, right? It's not trying to pay its rent. It's going to try and just give you the best answer possible. And in some ways that almost comes off as more trustworthy. You know what I mean?
That goes back to the why we wanted to do the B2B buying bot, because in theory, you can trust it. It's not and to call a salesperson biased is unfair. That's their job. They're trying to get you to buy their product, right? Ideally through some discovery and solution matching, but they're biased and they're going to turn your questions, your fears, your thoughts, ideally into here's how we could solve those, right? And like you said, a bot that is dispassionate and doesn't have a paycheck associated to it wouldn't have that kind of bias. And that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that and the sort of additional trust you have in a generative AI system because of those reasons.
Yeah. It is an interesting space. I will say, the more you've got me thinking all sorts of things about AI now, and to me, I'm more the techno optimist. I know that there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, AI is not for real. None of this is profitable." There's always that element, but I feel like over the next 10 years, next 15 years, I mean, even next 100 years, we will continue to have this technology. It continues to get better, and there's just so many opportunities there. I think that you've helped, kind of illuminate some of the opportunities in terms of marketing, in terms of sales, that kind of thing. And I think it's also like what you're saying. It's very much about creativity and figuring out what's the next thing we can do with this. You know what I mean? It's kind of staying nimble there. I don't know if you have anything to add to that or any thoughts.
Oh, I think you summarized our conversation really well, and it's been just a real pleasure to chat with you. This is so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, a lot of people are probably listening to this thinking, he's pretty on it. He speaks incredibly well. Where can I find Rod and his company?
You can find us at trynubara.com, trynubara.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Rodrigo Fuentes. My DMs are open, and I love chatting with people about this and everything generative AI.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess, is there anywhere people could find that slide deck you were showing or your blog or anything like that?
Yes, I'll put that up on the blog. So it's trynubara.com/blog, and it'll be the first link on the top.
Yeah, and we could probably put a link in somewhere too. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been great having you on the show.
Likewise, it's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to reconnecting soon, man.
Absolutely. That was Rod Fuentes, co-founder and CEO of Nubara. You can find him on LinkedIn, and you can find his company at trynubara.com. That's trynubara.com. I'm your host, Lee Cooper, and it takes me a long time to put together these podcasts, so I'd love it if you only take a few seconds to rate and review this episode on your podcast player of choice. Or if you're on YouTube, just take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to make sure you get upcoming episodes. I'll see you next time.